Good Vibes Only is a Call of Cthulhu modern day scenario written by Phaedra, and I'm going to be talking about the top tips for running the scenario and a bit of a review of it as well. So my name is XPLovecat, and this scenario, it takes place in the modern day, and it's a one-shot scenario taking roughly about 3 hours. It is on the shorter side, which makes it a pretty good fit for convention scenarios. Players find themselves at a spiritual retreat in the UK where they're trying to find their true selves and their inner peace. That is, until someone in their cabin starts pleading for help. Maybe this retreat won't be so relaxing after all. From this point forward, there will be spoilers. So what's the deal with this retreat? Basically, the group running this retreat is called the Society of Energetic Beings. They want to take the people at this retreat and feed it to the bismuth, which is a giant crystalline lotus. Once they get integrated with this bismuth, they would reemerge as delusionally serene and optimistic. So definitely not themselves anymore, and they'd be ready to go into the world as basically human adjacent creature with nothing but positivity. Right away, I loved the intro to the scenario and the speech that was written out for the retreat leader named Sage. It was very fun to portray her and give all of her wonderful wisdom to the people at this retreat. So I really enjoyed that was laid out, and it set the scene and the tone for the type of game that this is going to be. In addition, the scenario provides a retreat schedule and a list of rules while you're at the retreat, and both of these should be supplied to the players, and it really helps to frame up that this is going to be a contained scenario, so it really only takes place in this one day. Which also helps it stay a little bit shorter of a scenario. But the real fun part is watching your players struggle to keep up with that schedule as they're going through these investigations and trying to find moments in which they can figure out what's happening. There's really only 3 NPCs you have to be worried about, and that's Sage, Malcolm, and Kiriana. Sage, she is the leader of this retreat, and she is the all-knowing, wise, peace-loving being that is going to be teaching everyone how to find their true selves. But she's also the cult leader and the one that is going to be feeding the people at the retreat to this giant flower. In addition, she has quite a lot of spells to back up her power as well. So just keep that in mind as you get to the climax of the scenario, is she's pretty powerful, and to make sure you're prepared with the different spell options so you can react accordingly if there happens to be a combat that takes place. Now, Malcolm is Sage's right-hand man, and he is a cult initiate as well as someone who loves to share fitness and eating tips and all of the good things to take care of yourself. But it was fun for me to kind of take it overboard and make him a little bit annoying with all of his advice. So it's fun to play around with him and see what kind of personality he might bring to the game. Kiriana is a member at the retreat, but she's kind of undercover. See, her wife Sylvia actually went to one of these retreats a while ago, but she came back not like herself. She was positive all the time, but also just kind of felt a shell of who she was before. Kiriana describes her as being lobotomized. So she is really here to try and figure out what is going on with these retreats, to investigate and perhaps find a way to save her wife. Now, it's written in the scenario that Kiriana would meet with the investigators in the cabin and swear them to secrecy and tell them everything she knows about this retreat and what's going on, which is actually a lot. She essentially info dumps all of this information on them, and it actually felt like it lost the opportunity for the investigators to discover it themselves, and therefore taking some of the fun out of the potential of the scenario. So instead, I would suggest making a couple tweaks with Kiriana and her knowledge. I really think the only 2 things that she needs to know going into this is something weird is happening and her wife just isn't right. And number 2 is the incense has something to do with it, but she doesn't connect the pieces on exactly what the incense is for or how to avoid being taken over by it. This will at least give your players a lead to go investigate and give them a little light bulb that they need to figure out that the people running the retreat aren't all happy and peaceful for a good reason. In addition, it's written in that Kiana has a journal from her wife, which has a bunch of notes related to the scenario. I again felt like this was just too much information and completely removed it from the scenario. And the final note on Kiana is she's written in to actually steal the keys from Malcolm to be able to get into the office at the retreat center. But I felt like this gave a little bit of agency away from the investigators, and it's easily something that they could figure out a way to steal themselves or figure out a different way to get into the office. So those are just a few tweaks that I made to Kiana to make sure that the investigators got that discovery feeling and lengthen the scenario just a little bit to be able to fully experience the story and have additional agency. The first activity on the schedule is the bonding yurt, and this was a lot of fun. I did lead my players through some breath work just a little bit to get them in the mode and really get them feeling like they were in this retreat and trying to calm down their nervous systems and all that fun stuff. So after the breath work was done, they were instructed to bury their treasured possession, and this is a great opportunity to give your players the chance to talk about their investigators, maybe a little bit about their past and their treasured possession. It just gives a roleplay opportunity for them that is really well worked into the scenario. Let's talk about the incense. So this is what is used to influence the members of the retreat to go and be integrated with the flower at the ceremony at the end of this day. However, I struggled with this a bit because in the scenario it's written that Kiana knows exactly how to reverse the effects of the incense, which is essentially making negative comments or trying to snap themselves out of these positive thoughts. But it wasn't really rational that she would have that information. Even if you did decide to include the journal, her wife in theory was succumbing to the incense herself, so she wouldn't have had the sense to write out exactly how to break this spell or break the influence of the incense. So I really didn't felt like it was appropriate for Kiana to know how to deal with this. So it didn't really make sense for me to lay out to players how to break the effects of this incense, but they also didn't think of it themselves. And you'll notice that pretty quickly, the player agency is taken away if they continue to get incense exposure. And they also didn't think to hold their breath. So the other change that I made to this is to keep a tally mark of every time the players have been exposed and lessen the effects that are listed on the table. So it's making it difficult for them to think negative thoughts, but they still can, and they have agency over their action. Then based on the number of tally marks, this makes it more difficult for them to resist integrating with the business. When they see it at any point, even before the official ceremony, if they've been exposed at least twice, they must pass a power roll to not move towards the flower to be integrated. If they've been exposed 3 to 4 times, they must pass a hard power roll. If they've been exposed 5+ times, then it's an extreme power roll. That really helped to make sure everyone had player agency, and at the end it was nice to see one of my players who had gotten more exposed. He was lured into the flower and the other players were there trying to fight to make sure that he didn't go in. One of the key scenes takes place in the cabin, and this is where one of the NPCs clogs the toilet. But basically he is responsible for cleaning up this mess himself and is given pure sulfuric acid from the members of the retreat to clean this. So that should be a little bit of a clue that something is a bit off here. Now this acid is a backup plan for Sage if she has to melt the dome that is surrounding everyone at this retreat. That's a way to get through and escape if she needs to. For the rest of the activities for the day, really lean into that role play and the peaceful good vibes of everything going on at this retreat, and also make sure to keep track of those tallies for the incense or using the table if you decide to go that route. You can also show the NPCs that are slowly getting a little bit more crazy and positive as the day wears on. Now, the way I'm kind of justifying that they would be more affected by the incense than the investigators is that they haven't been tipped off to the fact that something is off here, so they're fully in it. They're fully giving themselves over to the process, and they are just letting themselves become part of the craziness. The final location is the underground greenhouse, and keep in mind that if your investigators broke the rules at any point, that they would have gotten some talking to, and if they broke the rules a few more times, they perhaps were given the opportunity to have individual one-on-one counseling in which the incense was brought into the room and made them pass out so they could be early initiated into this flower. Although my players did a really good job of sneaking around and not being obvious about breaking rules, I really did love this part of the scenario and thought it was an extra incentive for the players to keep on track and be a little bit more secretive. I really enjoyed the description of this underground greenhouse. The room smells moist and vibrates at all times. The plants seem to imperceptibly move and sway in rhythm with the buzzing and vibration. Stepping too close puts them in direct contact with its crystalline vapors, which both give them horrific nausea and compel them to walk inside and be consumed. Someone in a pre-integration phase feels nothing but pure joy and happiness. But someone early on in the process of integration experiences an interaction with the bismuth as a waking nightmare. So how this final part plays out will be very dependent on how your investigators approach this. My investigators went there early to try to set everything on fire because, you know, fire solves everything in Call of Cthulhu. So like I said, one of my players was encouraged to go to the flower, but the other investigators stopped him. They ended up killing Malcolm while Sage escaped and presumably is still out there doing her thing. So my overall keeper tips is really lean into the roleplay. The setting is very fun and a good experience to bring them into what it would be like in this retreat setting. I suggest making Kiana have less information just so your players can experience that discovery, and also adjusting the incense rules a little bit so it's not quite taking away so much agency from the players. My final thoughts on the scenario is I think it would make a great convention scenario. It's very confined both in terms of the location but also the timeline, so you know you can probably get it done in about 3 hours. The handouts were really well done and I thought there were an appropriate amount to help support the scenario. And with a little bit of work on the keeper's end, you can adjust some things so that there's more discovery for the investigators and experience this whole story in a little bit more of a fun execution of it. Overall, I'm a sucker for new mythos entities and spells, so I love that this was part of the scenario and my players and I had fun playing it. If you're interested in checking it out, it'll be linked in the description below. And if you like this content and want to continue to support me, I do have a Patreon if you'd like to check that out as well. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.